Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to our lecture number 9 under the series of philosophy and leadership of environmental health and safety. As you are aware, we've been having a number of lectures, a series of lectures, and as I speak now, we've gone through 8 lectures. And right now we are on the 9th lecture. I'll try to remind you what we covered in our 8th lecture so that we proceed with the lecture that we are supposed to be covering today. If you recall, last Saturday we had a meeting and we did discuss a number of things in that meeting. And you did ask a number of questions, and we also agreed on the series of activities that you are supposed to undertake in order to complete this course successfully. Now, in our last lecture, which was lecture 8, we looked at our topic 3, and our topic 3 dealt with fundamental human rights. Human rights here as a concept was discussed in relation to health, safety, and well-being. And if you recall very well, you may agree with me that there is no way you can talk about issues of health, safety, and well-being without really referring to human rights. So I did introduce human rights in relation to health, safety, and well-being. In that lecture, I defined what human rights refers to. We also did go through the concept of justice and environmental health. And then we did go through a number of standards and policies that are developed or required to promote human rights and, of course, health, safety, and well-being. And then from there, we looked at how health, safety, and well-being can be treated as human rights. And then we did also go through the ways or the perspectives through which organizations and national states, or what you call countries, can embed environmental health and safety in policy. And of course, the concept can start at the national level and then later on permeate down to the various organizations. And then after that, I did conclude the whole topic of human rights. So today, ladies and gentlemen, in our lecture 9, we treat topic 4. And topic 4 deals with responsible and ethical business practices and their synergies with health, safety, and well-being. That is the topic we are covering today in lecture 9, and I know that I will not be able to complete this topic in this lecture, but I'll come back in lecture 10 and conclude this very topic. So we look at responsible and ethical business practices and their synergies with health, safety, and well-being, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in this lecture, I'll give you an introduction as to what we really mean by responsible and ethical business practices and their synergistic interactions to produce this concept of health, safety, and well-being. From there, we shall go through an understanding, or I will expose you to the concept of responsible business practices. And then thereafter, we shall go to the changing role of business in society. Then thereafter, we shall move very fast and discuss responsible business practices, what these responsible business practices are. And then we shall go to standards and instruments for promoting and implementing responsible business practices. And then we shall move on to different contexts, different business responsibility and sustainability priorities. And if you bother to look at your course outline, this is a topic that is presented as topic 9. Fortunately, when we discuss what we call responsible business practices, we discover that this very topic actually fits under responsible and ethical business practices. So it will be covered in this lecture. And then thereafter, we shall go to responsible business practice and relate responsible business practice or practices to safety, health, and well-being. And thereafter, God willing, we shall be able to conclude our lecture. Right, so let me begin by introducing this very important topic of responsible business practices. Ladies and gentlemen, we know very well that work provides a number of economic and other social benefits. And those are the aspects that we have been discussing throughout these last 8 lectures. We also know that the work environment and the nature of work are both important influences on a number of issues like productivity at the workplace. Also important, the job satisfaction. We are talking about employees being satisfied with their tasks, responsibilities, and jobs that they hold at the workplace and the various organizations. And we also know that the nature of work and the work environment also has an important influence on the health, safety, and well-being of employees. Now, this work environment and the nature of work itself, ladies and gentlemen, are all intrinsically linked to sustainability. Remember, the concept of sustainability will be discussed in detail later on. It is therefore important, ladies and gentlemen, for organizations, for enterprises to manage and improve working conditions. And as we saw in our second topic, ladies and gentlemen, there is a need for managers to manage working conditions. And this has become an increasingly important concept in recent decades because of the changes at the workplace and the changes in the various jobs that we perform at the workplace. We also know that these significant changes that have taken place in the world of work, ladies and gentlemen, including the nature of work and the work organization, the various contractual arrangements, the new forms of employment, the use of new technology at the workplace, and the changes in the workplace are also very critical and important when we are discussing issues of health, safety, and well-being. Now, in order to address these issues, ladies and gentlemen, a number of policies, a number of approaches have been developed over the years. And these policies and procedures and approaches which have been developed over the years have been implemented by various stakeholders at different levels: international level, national level, regional level, and sectoral levels. And of course, not forgetting the enterprise levels. But the objective of all these things is to try and promote health, safety, and well-being at work. And that's why these are very important concepts and very important considerations at the workplace. Now, if I also take you back, just to remind you, in our topic 3, and of course today we are dealing with topic 4, but in topic 2 and topic 3, we discussed policies and approaches which are relevant to the management of the workers' health, safety, and well-being. And these ones included things like the regulatory standards. And of course, these included regulations such as national regulations, or what you can call legislations. We also did look at the International Labour Organization conventions. I hope you still remember that. And these were discussed in terms of the hard and soft, what we call the non-binding voluntary standards. And these were developed in order to assist organizations and national states to manage what we call environmental health in terms of health, safety, and well-being at the workplace. Now, of course, these international organizations, of course, take a number of forms, and they also attempt to provide guidance and also social orientations and also agreements, by the way, established in terms of partnerships. And in so doing, they are able to help us articulate and manage this concept of environmental health. Ladies and gentlemen, we also know that significant changes, and these are things that we have already covered, that significant changes in the world of work has also brought about this important consideration. And these changes are in terms of the digital revolution. I hope you still remember that. The delocalization of production throughout the entire world, the increasing competition between the high-wage and low-wage countries, and all these certainly pose significant challenges to the enforcement of labor laws, the enforcement of environmental health and safety standards that have been developed by international institutions like the International Labour Organization and the United Nations and World Health Organizations. For you just to remember, if you recall very well, at one stage I did say that about 10% of the working population in developing countries is covered by health and safety laws. You can imagine, out of the total number of the working population, which constitute about 100%, only % of the working population in developing countries is covered by health and safety laws. Only about 10%, right, is covered by those health and safety laws, because in developing countries we lack what you call a mechanism for enforcing and, of course, enforcing those laws and regulations. So in developing countries, nobody bothers enforcing these things. Now, in this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we outline key concepts and developments in the field of responsible business practices and sustainability. And when you talk about responsible business practices, we also feel that organizations and national states should be able to enforce these things. We then discuss synergies between business responsibility and health, safety, and well-being. Of course, trying to highlight the link between sustainability and health, safety, and well-being. We also link those concepts to strategic management, because in various organizations, at the end of the day, the CEOs are concerned with the outputs which could be reflected in terms of the money, or what we call the income, that businesses bring. And of course, later on, we also attempt to discuss the synergies between business responsibility and health, safety, well-being, because we want to promote employee health and safety and well-being through an integrated, sustainability-oriented business responsibility approach. And that's why we are really very much concerned with this concept. Right, let's now let's venture into this concept of business, what we call responsible business practices. What are they? We need to understand responsible business practices. And we need to understand what constitutes this topical and debated subject. It is a topical issue, highly debated in the literature, and I'm sure if you bother to read, you'll find the debates and the perspectives that exist in literature. Now, this debate that we find in literature, ladies and gentlemen, has provided broad philosophical questions about a number of things. For instance, one about the roles and responsibilities of business and industry. What is the role of business? What is the role of industry? What is the relationship between the roles and responsibilities of government and other stakeholders? Therefore, in this lecture, we first briefly examine the role of business in society and the changing definitions and the meaning of responsible business practices. We then discuss, by process of extension, legitimization and global governance, which has certainly created several standards that many nations or national states are supposed to follow in order to promote responsible business practice, and then the standards that are supposed to be implemented and reviewed from time to time, so that there's a number of that are brought forth or to the fore to be able to help these organizations manage employee health, safety, and well-being. And then, of course, we conclude with a discussion on the relationship between initiatives and standards to promote business practices. Right. So, what do we mean by the changing role of business in society? Now, business and industry certainly plays an important role and a significant role in society, and this relationship is probably more visible now than ever before. We all know what businesses, or the roles played by businesses in various societies. You know very well, they create value, they certainly create and bring about development, they provide employment, and at the end of the day, provide income to government. And of course, that income that government gets through taxation is used to probably develop societies and be able to come up with the development and the construction of social services which are required by the community and the society at large. So, of course, the role of business society cannot be overemphasized. And I do not even want to spend too much time discussing this, because we all know what it is. So this role has been probably emphasized in various communities and societies and various settings, because companies can and actually do create value for society. So companies create value for societies. For example, by producing goods and services that fulfill real needs in that particular society or community. And of course, consequently, these businesses also have a social responsibility and what we call environmental responsibilities by contributing to the quality of life and creating meaningful, or what we call decent, employment. So companies do provide employment, but this employment is supposed to be decent and supposed to be meaningful. Ladies and gentlemen, having or creating meaningful and decent work is an important attribute of companies. And we also see, for instance, the International Labour Organization 2012 has actually defined and given us those particular attributes and traits that do constitute what we call decent work. Now, decent work is a means for achieving equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development. And there's no question about that. So if you are talking about equitable, sustainable development, then you are talking about decent work. If you are talking about inclusive, sustainable development, then you are talking about decent work. So decent work is a means for achieving equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development. And that's why we need to be bothered by this. So International Labour Organization 2012 defines decent work to cover a number, actually, that document highlights 10 substantive elements that are supposed to be covered under what we call decent work. And these are, the 10 elements are employment opportunities, for instance. If a company is able to create and provide employment opportunities, then you can talk about that element of decent work. The second aspect that is covered is adequate earnings and productive work. So employees are supposed to get what is considered as adequate. Of course, you know very well, that's a very elusive term and very difficult to touch and capture, because possibly what you call decent or what you call adequate earnings is not what I call adequate earnings. But all the same, the United Nations has come up with not United Nations, but International Labour Organization 2012 has come up with a description of what they mean by adequate earnings and productive work. Of course, the other component, which is the third, is decent working time. Right, so that is part of decent work, right? Then you have combining work, family, and personal life. Now, these three aspects are very difficult to balance, ladies and gentlemen. Issues of family, work-life balance is one of the most difficult things, and the International Labour Organization talks about that concept under what we call decent work. And of course, the other element is work that should be abolished is also talked about in the International Labour Organization document 2012 in terms of decent work. Then stability and security of work, then equal opportunity and treatment in employment, what you call the safe work environment, then issues of social security, issues of social dialogue between the employers and the workers, all those articulated in the International Labour Organization document of 2012 to constitute what we call decent work. So, ladies and gentlemen, again referring you to another document of the European Commission in 2006, the decent work agenda certainly is constituted by a number of things. And of course, that document talks about the core labor standards. It talks about a number of things that form what we call minimum basis for social rights. And of course, as established by the international community, and they also talk about tailoring values and principles of action and governance in order to achieve economic competitiveness with social justice. Now, of course, all these documents that I'm talking about and standards and policies have forced various companies to try and come up with the various documents and standards that they can follow to try and provide decent work at the workplace. Again, as a way of promoting what we call health, safety, and well-being of employees at the workplace. So this force, ladies and gentlemen, that we are talking about which has brought about the development of documents at the workplace, of course, stemming from the United Nations and International Labour Organization and other conventions, treaties, and agreements, as we know very well, have forced the companies to think beyond the profit maximization concept or goal. We know very well that most companies actually are established with a major objective of making profits, right? But whereas, of course, there's an argument about that concept of profit maximization, and as you're aware, Drucker was, I think, Peter Drucker was one of those first scholars, management scholars, to challenge that particular concept of profit maximization. And of course, you also have other people who came up with their own views, like Friedman, you know that very well, that celebrated economist. And so, of course, the perspectives and the views about profitability have been presented in literature, and you'll find this information there. But all the same, right now, we are also recognizing the fact that businesses may pursue that profit motive. Now, when these documents come up in these various international conventions, United Nations conventions, agreements, treaties, and of course also having World Health Organization, then businesses are forced to start thinking. They are forced to start reflecting on their core values. They are forced to start thinking about their corporate identity. They are forced to start thinking about their business practices and how they select their business partners. They start thinking about the right things which they are supposed to be doing at the workplace so that at the end of the day they are able to succeed. And success here will be in terms of people, in terms of planet, and in terms of profit. And this is what we call the 3 Ps. And this information is contained in European Commission. So they must actually start thinking about these things. And sustainable development, according to European Commission 2001, does actually spell out those 3 aspects properly. The aspects of people, the aspect of planet, and the aspect of profit. And therefore, social awareness is also increasing about those 3 things, about the externalities of businesses, about the problems which companies have caused to the environment, the problems caused by companies to, of course, the biosphere and the oceans and everywhere. So companies now start thinking beyond profit maximization as a concept, and they start revisiting their orientations, their philosophies, and their practices in terms of identity, in terms of values, and I've already talked about this concept, ladies and gentlemen. So, such a shifting responsibility, such a shift in responsibility, and of course, you are shifting from that perspective to society is not really an easy thing. But certainly, it is regarded as acceptable. So companies must shift, right, their responsibility towards profit maximization to achieving those greater things that are demanded by the communities and societies. And therefore, enterprises are increasingly expected to think and act inclusive, ladies and gentlemen. So that is an important aspect that is worth thinking about. And not forgetting that that process requires transparency. That aspect requires communication. So you must continue communicating with your stakeholders. And of course, you must also think about those ethical standards and so forth. So the concept of sustainability is becoming very important. And in the previous lecture, I did talk about Armstrong, who flew up there. And he said that I wish people knew that the planet Earth is no longer able to sustain humankind or humanity, and therefore we must be able to do something in order to ensure that this planet Earth can hold the people who are on it. So that's what we see here. Now, just to remind you something, ladies and gentlemen, in 1992, and I did say this last time, but I just want to remind you so that you are able to connect the previous lecture to this lecture here. In 1992, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, of course, which is commonly referred to as the Rio Summit, highlighted the importance of sustainability and its link with the environment. So that summit did discuss a number of issues, but the concept of sustainability was highlighted as a key concept. And they did say that sustainability and the link to its environment must be aligned with business responsibility agenda, meaning that it is the responsibility of every company to realign the sustainability aspects to the environment and the business agenda. And no wonder, in that United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, again the Rio Summit that I'm talking about here, reiterated that there are three dimensions to sustainable development. And those three issues were society, environment, and economy. And that, if you recall, those are what we called the three Ps a few minutes ago: the people, the planet, and the profit. People, we are talking about society, right? People, I mean, when we talk about planet, we are talking about the environment. And when we talk about profit, we are talking about economy. Now, these three things highlighted by the Rio Summit, right, indicates that these three are integrated and cannot be separated. So you talk about society, you talk about the environment, and you talk about the economy. Because there is no way you will make profit without the people, and there's no way you will make profit without the environment. There is no way you talk about the society without talking about the economy and without talking about the environment. So these three things are intertwined and not separate at all. Therefore, sustainability, ladies and gentlemen, is a paradigm for thinking about the future. This concept of sustainability is a paradigm for thinking about the future in which the environment, in which society, in which economic considerations are balanced in the pursuit of improved quality of life. So we must balance those three things. And therefore, sustainability is a long-term goal. It is not a short-term goal as we see. And from the same documents produced by the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, in the resolution adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on the 27th July 2012, they did highlight what they termed as the future we want. Now, in the resolution contained in that document, the future we want, heads of states and governments recognize the importance of engaging with major groups and other stakeholders in order to achieve sustainable development. And no wonder, in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly also endorsed another document in terms of sustainable development goals, and those are the ones we are talking about. But just back in the United Nations 2012 document that we call the future that we want, on page 9, the resolution states that we acknowledge that the implementation of sustainable development will depend on the active engagement of both public and the private sector. Now, in the same document, on that page, that is page 9, the same document says, we recognize that the active participation of the private sector can contribute towards the achievement of sustainable development, including through the important tool of public-private partnerships. So the concept of PPP was introduced then, public-private partnerships. Governments alone cannot achieve results, and the private sector cannot achieve results, but you need that interplay of the public-private partnerships. And in the same document, it says, we support national regulatory and policy frameworks that enable business and industry to advance sustainable development initiatives, taking into account the importance of corporate social responsibility. And the document continues to say, we call on the private sector to engage in responsible business practices such as those promoted by the United Nations Global Compact. And that is contained in the United Nations 2012 document, page 9, on the document we call the future that we want. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think you see how important these things are. And as a result, major initiatives in the area of sustainable development goals, which set the global sustainability agenda until 2030, explicitly refers to full and productive employment and decent work for all as a means of achieving sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. And you find that in SDG 8, Sustainable Development Goal 8. So all these things that you will find in the SDGs were actually articulated during that time. And what I'm going to do now is just to list these SDGs, where you'll find those aspects that relate to the subject that we are talking about, the subject of decent work, the subject of what we call health, safety, and well-being. All these are contained in the United Nations document 2015, Sustainable Development Goals. So you'll find those aspects in Goal 3. For instance, Goal 3, SDG 3, talks about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. Now, that is Goal 3. There is that element. Goal 4 also talks about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. So there's still an element that relates to health, safety, and well-being. If you go to Goal 5 talks about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And that is still an element of environmental health and safety, targeting health, safety, and well-being. So there must be gender equality. Discrimination is an issue that is supposed to be discouraged at the workplace. And you must empower all, women and girls and so forth must be empowered. Another area, that is Goal 8, I've already talked about that, promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. That is Goal 8. Now, Goal 10 also talks about reducing inequality within and among countries. So there must, the efforts must be taken to reduce inequalities within and among countries. Again, inequality is a very interesting subject in terms of income inequality, in terms of wealth inequality, in terms of capital labor inequality, in terms of technological inequalities. All those things are very important. Possibly they will be discussed later on. Goal 12 talks about responsible consumption and production, and still articulate those aspects. So, ladies and gentlemen, you will allow me at this material moment to move a little bit fast, but conclude our lecture as well. So why don't I now briefly present our understanding of the concept of responsible business practice. Now, as discussed in the previous discussions and presentations and statements I have made, organizations by their very nature have responsibilities. And these responsibilities are economic, they are ethical, they are legal responsibilities and social responsibilities. And these are assigned to these business enterprises. And they are assigned to them by the laws, the regulations, by their shareholders, because they know what they are supposed to achieve in the wider environment. So they are assigned to them. Now, of course, although we talk about sustainable development, I've already told you, there is lack of consensus in terms of definition. But certainly we know that the triple bottom line concept does apply. So you always find those three aspects of the economy, the social, and the environmental aspects. And of course, issues of stakeholder engagement will also surface, and of course, being integrated in what we call company management and strategy as articulated by Porter or Michael Porter. And of course, you have other issues of transparency coming in, social accountability, and issues of the social environment and social innovation. So those are aspects that do draw our attention to the concept of sustainable business practices. However, let me also say that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, usually referred to as CSD, in their publication, that document called Making Good Business Sense, gives a much broader outlook of the concept. That very document defines business responsibility as continuing commitment by business to behave ethically and contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society at large. You'll find that in that document, WBCSD 2000 on page 6, and that's the definition. Now, of course, in the same document, the number of things that have been articulated to constitute what we call corporate social responsibility. And there are 5 principles that make up the core social responsibility concept. And of course, all these are very important and must be articulated. But let me just highlight them or maybe mention them. 1 is what we call creativity. 2 is what we call scalability. 3 is responsiveness. 4 is locality. And 5 is circularity. So those are the aspects that promote what we call corporate social responsibility in various companies. So I just want to invite you, during your free time, to start reading about corporate social responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. So you will allow me to conclude this lecture at this material time, and then in our next lecture, which I call lecture 10, I'll begin with the standards and instruments for promoting and implementing responsible business practices. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for attending this lecture and being responsible citizens, and of course having that thirst and desire to try and understand this concept of what we call environmental health and safety. Now, in this lecture, I gave you the introduction. I took you through and gave you an understanding of responsible business practices. I have also given you the changing role of business in society, and we have also attempted to understand various aspects that relate to the practice of implementing responsible business practices. As I said, in our next lecture, we shall proceed with the standards and instruments for promoting and implementing responsible business practices. And of course, we shall look at the different contexts, different businesses and responsibilities and sustainability priorities, and be able to also look at responsible business practices to environmental health and safety, and thereafter conclude. And all that will come in our next lecture. I want to thank you for attending this lecture, and I want to thank you for the good job you are doing in terms of reading and supplementing the material that I've given you. And I can say I wish you the best time. Stay home, stay safe, and I can say I wish you a nice time. Let's meet next week in our next lecture 10. Thank you very much. Bye.